Welcome to the Plant-Based Runners podcast. I'm Ellie Busby, your host, vegan nutritionist and founder of Vojo Health. Today, I'm speaking with Tara Gallimore, who's a registered dietitian and nutritionist and Canadian expert in plant-based sports nutrition. We talk about underfueling, the signs of underfueling, whether to train fasted or not, intuitive eating, gut issues in runners, stress fractures, and much, much more. I really recommend listening to this episode, even if you don't think underfueling is a problem for you, because we cover so many important topics for runners. The Plant-Based Runners podcast is brought to you by Vojo Health, the DNA test to personalize your diet to your needs so you can break through fatigue and pain and get fitter, faster, and stronger with nutrition tailored to your body. Head on over to vojo.health for more information. Now on with the show.
Diving straight into the problem, what is the problem, the main problem that you see in vegan athletes, and why do you create this content for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually see probably two main problems for vegan athletes. I would say that one of them, relating more to the body composition aspect of things, is that there's a lot of pressure that people experience, and not necessarily just vegan athletes. I think athletes in general, and probably a lot of people who are not even athletes, there's just a lot of pressure to have a certain body composition or a certain muscle mass or a certain look, I suppose. I think there's this false idea we get that, okay, here's this person who's an excellent athlete and they have, a certain body type. And if I were to have the exact same body type as them, if I was to look just like they do, if I was to have the same body composition, I'm going to be just as effective as my sport. But that's not the case. All of us are so different, and the body composition that it takes for us to be the best version of ourselves is going to be super different than what it is for our friend or our neighbor or even for another professional athlete. And then yeah. And I was going to say, and the second thing I see specifically for vegan athletes is that I think a lot of the nutrition information out there is meant for people who are not vegan or people who are not vegetarian. And making sure that we get the nutrients that we need, that's not really focused on very much because everything is tailored for a different group that might not necessarily be relevant to us as vegans.
Oh my gosh, you've said so many things there that I already want to dive straight into, but let's take it one at a time. So yes, on your last point, I totally agree with you. There is so much information out there to help people make the change to going vegan, or like giving tips to help them eat a more plant-based diet, but maintaining it and making sure that you're continually getting all those nutrients that you need. There's actually not that much help out there.
Definitely.
How do we deal with this as an industry, I guess? What can we do about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as an industry, I think what you and I are doing is both really important because we're there working with people who are looking for that information, and it offers them, guidance in that regard, that's evidence-based. And I think at least that's what I feel like I'm contributing in terms of vegan nutrition, is being able to be a resource for people that's evidence-based so that they're not wondering, not only, okay, there's all these different ideas out there that I've heard, which of these are true and which are not true, but also of the ones that are true, which ones are actually relevant to me as an individual and as a vegan athlete.
That's such a good point. So, and that matches up with what you said earlier, that actually we're all different, like in terms of our body composition, but also what we should be eating. So how we look and how we perform and how we fuel, it's different for everyone. It's totally individual. And, as nutrition professionals, we both know this and we both work with this. And it's about translating that to people and helping them find that and discover what works for them themselves. It's so difficult when it
Definitely.
comes to body image, though, because, you know, you see
Mm.
athletes or other people who are in a running club, for example, or whatever else, and they might be maybe performing better than you. And you look at them and you're like, okay, that's what I need to look like. Maybe I need to be thinner. Maybe I need to be a bit more muscly. Maybe I need all of these things that they have that I don't. How do we overcome that?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that takes a lot of work. I think it takes a lot of work. And I think it takes as well recognizing that what's going to be best for your body isn't necessarily what's going to be best for someone else's body. And okay, I don't think I mentioned this, but I have my own business and I also teach sports nutrition at the National Circus School here in Montreal. And I think it's particularly pertinent there because we have, professional circus artists, and often circus companies are looking for, not just somebody's capability to do something, but unfortunately, they're also often looking for a certain body type or a certain weight, which the industry is changing, but for as long as it's like that, it's super detrimental to the artists. And I think what's super upsetting is that I've worked with people who are struggling with their relationship with food and working through eating disorders, for example. And it's just amazing because they will see a big improvement in their performance once they've started working on their relationship with food. And sometimes with that is going to come weight gain as well. But I think it's so beautiful when you can kind of see that alignment, like somebody's eating more, they might be gaining weight as well. And they're also seeing huge improvements, not only to their performance, but to their mental well-being, their state of mind, their coping mechanisms, like everything starts to improve. And when they can start seeing the parallels between those things, like eating more and seeing improved performance, I think that's so beautiful.
That's such a good point. So really giving people that that personal experience with how eating more or fueling better could actually dramatically improve your performance, even if you do put on a bit of weight or you do look different to what you imagined you would look like.
Yes.
I know that I probably speak for so many runners and other athletes out there, but I definitely went through a phase early on in my running career. I mean, it's not a career, but you know what I mean. That I was definitely underfueling for a significant amount of time. And, I had this thought process, which was like, well, if I'm lighter, I can run faster. That makes sense, right? I have less weight to carry. It's going to be much easier, etc. But then it's too easy to go overboard. And then as it can be okay at a certain point, but then you start, but then I would start running further and running faster, and I'm burning more energy, but I'm eating the same. So then I lose more weight. And then, that's when injuries start happening and fatigue and all of these problems start happening. You're like, and I didn't realize until I couldn't run anymore that it was a problem, that I actually wasn't fueling correctly. So I really had to go through all of reach the bottom, like rock bottom, to realize, oh yeah, okay, this isn't working. Something is wrong. Yeah. How many people do you see? Tell me please, that you see a lot of people that this has happened to.
It happens to so many people. It happens to so many people, and especially in runners too. Actually, it's really funny you should say that, because I can relate to some parts of your story, but I didn't recognize what was the problem. Like, it took me years to recognize what was the problem. But I remember, so I started working at a ice cream and chocolate shop, I think. So one of my jobs, it was during one of my first years of university, I was scooping ice cream for people and, putting chocolates in little boxes, and it was super fun. The food was so good. And I remember that year, I had just stopped playing soccer. So I had played soccer when I was younger for about 10 years. And I had stopped playing soccer for the first time because I wanted to focus on school. And so I was working in this chocolate shop and I was not playing soccer anymore. And during the course of the year, I gained 5 pounds, which now I'm like, who cares? You gain 5 pounds, no big deal. But at the time I was like, this is the end of the world. I thought it was the worst thing. So I made it my mission to try to lose these 5 pounds. And I was already like, I've never been a large person. I was already pretty, thin bodied. And so here I was trying to lose these 5 pounds. And I think I was taking maybe like a kinesiology course at school that was talking a little bit about food. So I was trying to like eat more vegetables, and I don't even know what I was doing, but I definitely ended up underfueling. And I went to the gym with my brother, who's actually a track athlete and he's very talented. And the two of us were running side by side on the treadmill. And he's like, I'll race you. So we were turning up the speed really, really high. And I was, running as fast as I could. And at the time I felt totally fine. But when I stepped off of the treadmill, and I got home and I took my shoes off and started trying to walk on the ground without shoes, I realized that my foot hurt so bad.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah. And when I went to the doctor, I had a stress fracture. And that's one of the hallmark signs of not eating enough, of underfueling. But unfortunately, it wouldn't be until years later that I can look back and realize, of course, if I hadn't been trying to lose that 5 pounds, I wouldn't have fractured my foot.
Yeah. I had a stress fracture too. And it's like, that is a wake up call. You can't do anything. I couldn't even walk for like 4 weeks. You definitely can't run for at least 6 weeks. So it's like any runner's nightmare. The last thing you want to get is a stress fracture or something, or an injury similar to that. So yeah, I can see that was a changing point. But you said you didn't even realize at that point that you were underfueling.
I had no idea. I didn't know it was a thing. None of my healthcare professionals mentioned to me that that's why people get stress fractures. They just I ended up having to get surgery actually because I was in pain for over a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was the stress fracture. I think the stress fracture itself healed, but then the nerve tissue underneath got damaged. So they had to go in and remove the damaged nerve tissue. So yeah, I couldn't do anything for about a year. I could bike, I think.
Oh my God, that's when I bought a bike as well. I was like,
really?
Can't walk, can't run. Now's the time to buy a bike.
Yep.
Also the start of my cycling fun. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, silver lining, but overall, underfueling, not good. And there's just, as you just said, there's just not enough information out there. I also had to figure it out myself.
Really?
And everybody else does as well. So what can we do about this? How can we get this information out there to people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about that sometimes. Like, how can we get this message out to a larger group of people? I don't know. I mean, I think the fact that you have a podcast, the fact that you're on YouTube, I think those two things already are great in terms of sending out this message. I think that for people who are seeking more information, I think, looking to work with a healthcare professional who can help you through that, and not just anyone. Unfortunately, because not all healthcare professionals are aware of some of the signs of underfueling and overtraining. Not all healthcare professionals have knowledge in the field of eating disorders and disordered eating. So you might go to someone and seek their help, but they might not be able to tell you that what's going on with your body is related to underfueling, like as was the case with both of us.
Yeah, I guess it's like you said, just getting the information in places where athletes are going to be anyway.
Yeah.
And, if it's not something you realize in yourself, it's not something you're going to be looking for. But if the information is in places where you're going to be anyway, then that's a really good starting point.
Definitely. Definitely. Yes. You want to look for that expertise in sports nutrition or, athletes.
So, okay, there's a lot of things we could go into regarding this, but let's quickly talk about fad diets. So there is a lot, I hear about intermittent fasting a lot. And I feel like this is quite a trigger for people who are already underfueling, or like not a trigger, but something that is related to underfueling, because it's like, I actually don't know how people fast intermittently and do a lot of sport. Like, it's quite difficult to balance the two. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Given the importance of pre-workout nutrition and post-workout nutrition, I think if you're doing fasting of any kind, I mean, I just don't recommend it at all. like I never ever recommend intermittent fasting. Usually when I see someone doing that, and especially when I see someone who's been doing that for a long time, they're pretty deep in their disordered eating at that point and might need to seek the help of a team to help them overcome their eating disorder, because it can make it really, really difficult to get enough fuel when you're deliberately denying your body food for, countless hours of the day. And there's something really important to be said about fueling before and fueling after a workout, so that you have the energy going into it and so that you have the appropriate recovery afterwards. And so I'm not a fan of intermittent fasting, but I also understand that when people are really deep into it, they might feel like they have to do it. They might feel like obligated to continue.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because when you have such a, oh my God, there are so many parts to this. Let's first say that there is some good evidence for intermittent fasting. There are some positive health benefits from this practice, but in reality, it has a lot of difficulties in implementation, especially in athletes, as we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But what was my next question? I can't even remember what I was going to say. No, totally gone. Do you have anything else to say on intermittent fasting?
Oh, that's a good question. I have a story of someone I worked with who was dealing with it.
Okay, yeah. If they don't mind.
Yeah, I'm not going to share their personal information or anything. But yeah, I did work with someone who had been intermittent fasting for about 2 years and was a runner, actually. And this person used to be able to run marathons. They were very talented and they had good times. And after doing that for 2 years, they stopped being able to do marathons. They just didn't have the capacity anymore. And it's so unfortunate because this was someone who was reading a lot of books about nutrition, and they were genuinely under the impression that this was going to be like the magic bullet in terms of making their performance really good. But I think ultimately their fear of weight gain was kind of keeping them in that intermittent fasting state. And it was so sad to see, like, someone who used to be so talented and used to be able to do so much, and to see how much it had taken from them in terms of the joy they used to get out of running and the number of miles that they used to be able to do, no problem. And intermittent fasting made it almost impossible. Well, yeah, impossible. They actually had to stop.
That's so sad. So
yeah,
we can see that disordered eating is difficult because A, you probably don't know that it's happening to you at the time.
totally.
And B, it can really take a toll or even ruin your sport career, or like just even doing sport recreationally. You can end up with injuries which prevent you from running or doing whatever else you do. That can have wider implications on your overall health if you're not getting enough of the nutrients. So, okay, so that's the problem. And let's move on to the solution. Let's move on to the happy bit. What are your top tips for eating healthily and healing your relationship with food as a vegan athlete?
Yeah, I would say that some of my top tips, one of them would be making sure that you're eating a minimum of 3 meals a day. And I really mean a minimum, because for people who are doing a lot more training, 3 meals isn't going to be enough. I remember when I was working at an office, and I think it took me about an hour to bike there. So I was doing 2 hours of biking a day, plus I was doing, I think, 3 hours a week of high intensity interval training. And in my mind, it's like, oh, I'm just commuting. It's not that big of a deal. But I mean, that adds up over time. And 4 meals a day was definitely what I needed. I mean, minimum. But yeah, minimum 3 meals a day is my my suggestion for people who are running, people who are doing sports. And honestly, even if you're not, even if you're completely sedentary, I think there's something to be said about eating at least 3 meals a day. I think snacks are super important in between meals, because if you're only eating like 3 times a day, that's a lot of hours that you're waiting in between breakfast and lunch and dinner, and your body could use the energy. We all get that like mid-afternoon slump where, a lot of the time if you eat something, you're going to notice your energy level come right back up. What else?
Oh my God, eating 3 meals a day, yes. Snacking, yes. And what do you do if you how can you recognize in yourself whether you need to be fueling more? What are your top tips for starting that process of self-reflection, I guess?
Yeah, there's a couple. So one of them is if you're having gastrointestinal problems, IBS type symptoms like bloating, like gas, discomfort when you're eating, especially if this is something that has been going on since you were a baby and it's just continued. It's possible that this is just how your gastrointestinal system works. I would still suggest talking to your doctor about it to see what's going on there. But if you suddenly start developing, gastrointestinal issues, one of the biggest contributors to those issues is actually underfueling. Gastrointestinal issues is one of the number one things that can happen when somebody's underfueling. And so when you see that as a symptom in someone, often we need to liberate their diet a little bit more and add a few more things in. And in the process of adding those things in, it's often super uncomfortable because your digestive system is getting used to eating more food. But that would be one of my tips for sure. If you're starting to notice GI symptoms, tummy upset, it might mean that you're underfueling.
That's such a good point. I kind of hadn't thought about or made a connection between these two things. But man, I used to have so many gut issues when I was running. Sometimes, and running would kickstart it as well. So I'd be okay in the morning, I'd go for a run and the gas and everything would just start. And then that would be me for the rest of the day.
Brutal.
And yeah, as soon as I started eating more fats, and that was really the key for me, getting a lot of healthy whole food fats in my diet, like several portions throughout the day, and not limiting them. As I started doing this, my gut issues kind of stopped, which is, it's kind of cool. And it's a really fascinating thing you brought up, because that is not something I would have thought to look out for.
It's not something that we're generally taught to look out for. Yeah, but it's a huge one. And I see it in so many people. And there's often a lot of resistance to it too, because naturally, if your stomach feels awful, your first reaction isn't like, let's eat more. It's not a natural reflex, Like usually people think, oh, it must be something I'm eating that I need to eliminate. But often it's the opposite. And it does take time. It's not like 2 days of eating more is going to help you. But, after weeks and months of eating more consistently and eating larger portions, it can really, really help. And I like to suggest starting small. Like if you don't normally eat breakfast, start with an apple in the morning within 30 minutes of waking up. It's really small. It's really simple. It's not too difficult to digest. And I feel for most people, if you're having GI symptoms, it's probably easy enough for your body to handle.
Yeah, definitely working up. Don't make any significant changes. That's like one of the worst things when people, so many people have gut issues when they start a vegan diet. But of course, when you're making dramatic changes in your diet, your gut bacteria have to adapt. There is a process where some old ones need to maybe die off a little bit and some new ones need to grow more so they can digest the different foods that you're eating.
Yes.
So I always say, beans and lentils and things, you can get used to them. And it's just a case of starting small. Like just start small and frequent and just like space it out throughout the day. So yeah, great point.
Definitely. Yeah. I love your advice about starting small with the beans and legumes.
Yeah. I mean, now I can eat like a bucket of beans and I'm fine. But that was not the case at the beginning, that's for sure. Speaking of breakfast, I know so many runners who run fasted, and I do too sometimes. Like, actually running fasted, training both running fasted and running fueled is great for your performance overall. But I also know a lot of runners who only run fasted, and they'll go quite long distances fasted. What are your thoughts on this?
So yeah, I can definitely give you my thoughts on running fasted. I actually think it would be best if I explained with what's happening in your body physiologically when doing any sort of fasted training. And let me see, it's actually been it's been a hot minute since I talked about this, so I want to make sure I have it all straight in my head. But when we train and our body perceives that there's not enough energy there to use as fuel for our training, I think often we're under the impression that our body's going to be using fat as the fuel when we're doing a fasted workout. The thing that's really interesting about that is that our body can't use fat only as a source of fuel. In order to be burning fat, it also has to be burning carbohydrates at the exact same time. Like, both of these processes kind of take place together. And once there's not enough carbohydrates left, the fat burning actually stops. So when we're running fasted, we're running using our glycogen stores, which is like our body's way of storing carbohydrate for the purposes of, training. And in addition to that, even though it's not ideal, our body will also use our muscle mass as a form of fuel during fasted workouts. And it's really interesting, I think, like this whole idea that our body is going to be using our own muscle mass to fuel our workouts for fasted training. It's kind of counterintuitive because it doesn't make sense. Like, why would our body do that? But when our body genuinely thinks like, okay, there's not enough food in the environment for me to be using, glucose and also fat together, then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to be using muscle mass instead. And that can, over the long term, not necessarily after doing this a few times, but over the long term, it can make it a little bit more difficult to reach our goals because we're burning through the muscle mass that we're supposed to be using as our, I don't know what to call it, but we're burning through the muscle mass, and ideally we want to keep that muscle mass. Does that make sense?
Be great. Yes, I do want to keep my muscle mass. Yeah, and this is one of the main reasons I talk about how fueling before and after you exercise is so important, because especially in the recovery phase after your exercise, if your body hasn't got those fuel stores, those glycogen stores, your muscle mass is going to be broken down and your body is going to use protein for its fuel. And you're like, that's the last thing you want, right? What you want to be doing is you want to be rebuilding your muscle and adapting to your exercise and improving, not breaking it down. That's crazy.
Yes.
So when it comes to fasted running, because there is evidence that fasted running can be good for performance, how do we, when we do that, two questions actually. How far can we go like that without damaging our muscle? And two, how often would you recommend that we train fasted, or how would you incorporate that, or would you at all actually?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I never recommend fasted training just because I think it's preferable to train our body to be using those carbohydrates as fuel instead. And I also think it's very individual. Like, I don't want to be too prescriptive, right? Like, if somebody feels fantastic working out fasted, then that's great. Most of the people I've worked with, however, when they switch from a fasted training session to a fueled training session, most of the time they tell me that they're able to have a lot more energy and run further during the fueled training session. So my personal recommendation is usually to try to have something. And oftentimes people are waking up super early in the morning and they just don't feel like they can eat. It's like you wake up, you want to go for a run and start your day. And it's a beautiful way to start your day, being outside, or for some people inside, depending on the weather. I love working out in the morning. But I think that if you don't have that much time and you're looking for something that's just going to digest super, super fast so your body can immediately use it for fuel, is something like juice. Because it's got that simple sugar. It digests super quickly because it's a liquid, And yeah, I think that goes down really nice and fast. And some people can drink that like maybe even 5 minutes before heading out the door. And that'll just kind of give them that burst of energy that they need without having to necessarily eat an entire meal before heading out.
That's a really, really good idea. Yeah, because I speak to so many runners who are like, I've run as soon as I wake up. There's no way I can eat a bowl of porridge or whatever before I go running. I would die out there. And that's totally fair enough. But yeah, since I actually can't remember the last time I did a fasted run. So and I have noticed that since I run fueled all the time now, it takes a while to get used to it. If you're used to fasted running, it takes a while for your body to switch that metabolism and actually learn. Your body has to learn how to use this new fuel and this new way of getting energy. So there is a learning process, but you're totally right. There's less risk of injury. You're less fatigued after your run, especially. That's what I noticed. While you're running, you can kind of keep going. But it used to be the case that after I run, I would be out for the rest of the day if I'd done a longer run. Now, I don't have that anymore. So that's if anything one great reason to run fueled.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good example, because if running is something that you really enjoy, you don't necessarily want to be sacrificing, your energy levels for the rest of the entire day just so that you can keep running in the morning. Why not do both? Like if you can do it fueled and then still feel great afterwards, that's fantastic.
Yeah, totally. So I have one more thing that I want to talk to you about, and we have touched on it a little bit. Intuitive eating is quite a buzzword at the moment. A lot of people are talking about it. What are your thoughts on intuitive eating with athletes, especially when, we talked about how it might be quite difficult to get all the nutrients you need and fuel, and you might not even be realizing that you're under fueling. How could you, what are your thoughts on intuitive eating as an athlete?
I have so many thoughts on intuitive eating as an athlete. As you were asking that question, just so many different things came to mind. One of the things that came to mind is that I'm very pro intuitive eating for athletes. I think that it is fantastic. I also think it's important for people to remember that intuitive eating isn't like the eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full diet. It involves also planning ahead and eating when it makes sense to eat, even if you're not necessarily hungry. And that might mean, having a glass of juice before you go for a run, or it might mean having a post-workout snack, even if you're not necessarily feeling hungry right at that moment. You're doing it because you know that your body could use that for recovery, and you're doing it kind of as a means of self-care. It's kind of like if you're going to leave the house for 4 or 5 hours and you're going to be running errands and you're not going to be stopping for food necessarily, just to take food with you in the car or to eat immediately right before you go, even if you're not hungry at that moment in time, because you know that it's going to be many hours before your next meal. So I think,
Go on. You were going to say.
Okay. I was going to say, I just think it's really important to keep in mind that intuitive eating isn't just about, it's not a set of rules. It really is about improving your relationship with food and knowing that you can eat whenever you want, wherever you want. And even if you're not hungry, just because it makes sense to, and because you're taking care of yourself.
That's the main point. And that's what I wanted to pick up on, actually. It's that caring for yourself. It's respecting your body and loving your body and knowing what you need in a way that means you can plan ahead. That means you can say, okay, I'm going to be out for 6 hours. I'm probably going to be hungry in a couple of hours. Let's pack this. That's such a good point. It's like, I don't know, it's like looking after your body like it's your favorite child, Yes. I mean, child, not favorite child.
Absolutely. And something else actually that comes to mind too with intuitive eating is I like to think of it on a spectrum. Like we have intuitive eating, which to me is like having a healthy relationship with food on one end. And then we have eating disorders on the other end. And then we have disordered eating kind of in the middle of the two. And it's kind of like you could go, your relationship with food could change over the course of your life or over the course of many months or whatnot. And so if you're if you're struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, it's not always possible to go straight from struggling to having a healthy relationship with food. I think sometimes people believe that that's how they're going to recover from an eating disorder or disordered eating, by moving immediately to intuitive eating. But for someone who's struggling with their relationship with food, intuitive eating is actually very advanced. And it might not be something that you're able to do while you're in recovery, but after you have recovered, or once you've gotten to a certain level of progression in your recovery, at that point, you might be able to start incorporating intuitive eating principles. Because I think before then, when someone's really stuck in their disordered eating, they might start to turn it into a diet of like, okay, only eat when I'm hungry, got to stop when I'm full, can only eat when I feel, physical hunger cues, whatever that means. Sometimes eating disorders can give us ideas in our head that are not going to allow us to get there until we have recovered a little bit more. So don't beat yourself up if you can't do it immediately. Not everybody can just eat intuitively like that.
You're so right. It's like when you're so primed to follow rules that you make up, it's like you're looking for rules everywhere. It's like, okay, intuitive eating, what are the rules of this diet? And yeah, it's just not the case. And you're right. It does take time, and you need to take steps to get there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have most of our listeners are runners. So what is okay, this is going to be a hard question. I apologize in advance.
Okay.
What is one change that people can make to improve their vegan nutrition or their diet for running, like pretty much today or maybe this week?
Honestly, I'm going to say that it's always making sure that you fuel before a run. I really, truly believe that. Even if it's something as small as a glass of juice or like a little handful of dried fruit or a popsicle, something that's just going to be rapidly digested, just try it and see how you feel. See if it makes a difference for your run.
That is such a good piece of advice. Thank you so much. And don't just try it for one day, try it for a week, try it for a couple of weeks and see, compare and see how your performance is.
Definitely. I love that. Yeah. Because just one day, you never know. You could have an off day, but that's a good call. Trying it multiple times, seeing how you feel and comparing it to previous weeks. Yeah.
Amazing. So Tara, tell us more about where, what about your practice, what you do there, and how people can find out more about you and how people can learn from you.
Yeah. So I am a registered dietitian, as you already mentioned, Ellie, and you can find me on Instagram at vegan.sports.nutrition.
And how can people work with you?
I would actually say, reach out to me on Instagram, write me a DM. I actually have a link in my bio where you can apply to set up a phone call with me, and we can talk for 30 minutes and just kind of see if we would be a good fit.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. And if anyone...
thanks for having me.
No worries. If anyone is in the UK, especially, and you're not a member of Vegan Runners UK, then definitely check out their website, become a member. It's a really great running club. I very, very much recommend it. I don't know if do you have a vegan running club in Canada?
I don't know if we do. That sounds really cool.
Well, you need to start one. Or someone does.
Yeah, clearly someone does need to start one. I'll have to look into this.
Final thing, Tara, do you have a website that people can visit?
I don't have a website. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram at this point in time. And I would say Instagram's probably the better way to get a hold of me, but you can find me on Facebook too. And that's also, I believe, at Vegan Sports Nutrition.
Okay, we're in the modern world. You don't actually need a website nowadays.
Right?
Cool. Thank you so much. It was great to speak to you.
Likewise.
If you're interested in starting a more personalized journey, maybe you're not ready to start working with a nutritionist or a dietitian yet, and you want some more information about your body, head over to vojo.health, where we provide DNA testing kits where you can learn about your body and learn about, which foods work best for you, what your muscle composition is like, and how you can train better with your body's needs. We also have a free course over there for anybody who is interested in finding out some more information for free.